Another financial blow for households this morning as water bills in England and Wales are going to increase by more than anyone expected. 36%, not the predicted 21%, but 36% over the next 5 years. On average, that'll mean an extra £31 a year that people will have to cough up.
Well, meanwhile, it comes off the back of the winter fuel payments being cut. Millions of WASPy women are still reeling from the news the government will not compensate them over changes to their retirement age. Let's speak now to the Energy Minister, Miatta Fahnbulleh, who joins us from Westminster. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us. I mean, it's a bit of a triple whammy, isn't it? Water bills going up, the winter fuel payments cut, energy bills are rising, and the WASPy women not being compensated. We'll come to all of those, but let's start with water bills, because that is the breaking news this morning, the fact that they're going up by more than expected, 36% on average over the next 5 years. There are a lot of people who are really angry about that figure because of the amount of money that's been put in by people over the years that they feel has been stripped out by the water companies and hasn't gone to investment when it should have done. This system is broken, isn't it?
It's absolutely broken. And, you know, people are right to be angry. Quite frankly, we're pretty angry as well. And, you know, it's a result of the fact that we've had a government for 15 years that didn't get a grip of the water industry, that you didn't make sure that money that was going through bills was going into absolute critical investment that we need in our crumbling water infrastructure, but instead was going into the pockets of bosses, was going into the pockets of shareholders. Now, we can't rewrite the past, we can't change the past, but what we can do is draw a line under that, which is why we have launched the biggest review of the water sector that we've had since privatisation. And whilst we're doing that, we're putting in place legislation that means that money that is going through the system will be ring-fenced to go into investment rather than into the pockets of bosses and shareholders. We've got to get a grip into the water industry. We know this, and we're getting on with doing that.
How much faith do you have in the regulator, Ofwat? Because when you decide, any government decides to privatise an industry, there's a risk that the profit motive, as has happened in this case, will rise to the surface and the public interest will take very much a second place. And that's what's happened here over years, as you've said. And that happened under Ofwat's watch. The whole point of a regulator is to stop that drift in the wrong direction. Do you have faith in Ofwat?
It is. And listen, the regulator is only as effective as the mandate and the remit it's given by government and the powers it's been given by government. And look, we're really clear that none of that is fit for purpose, which is why we're reviewing it in the round. But the priority for us is that we've got to get investment into our crumbling water infrastructure. You know, people can see it's broken. People can see we need to get the investment in. And we've got to try and turn around the legacy that we have. And that's not easy. And there are going to be difficult things, like, for example, the news today that bills are going to go up. But in the end, the importance is that we are making sure that we're putting in the mechanisms that weren't there before so that money is going into investment. It is not being bled out of the system, either in terms of pay packets for bosses or for shareholders.
You're sure about that? You're absolutely sure that this extra money that everyone's going to be forking out over the next 5 years isn't in some way, shape or form going to wiggle its way into dividends for the shareholders and extra payments for the bosses? You're certain that that won't happen?
Well, that's why we are legislating to put that ring fence in place. We're not taking any gambles. We're not going to leave it to chance. We are making sure that there is an absolute watertight ring fence to do that, as well as going pretty hard so that when things go wrong, there is clear liability for companies and bosses. So this is a big change. But, you know, for me, the really important bit is that we get that review right, that we take a root and branch look at what's happening in the water industry. Because, again, water is an absolute essential good. So we need to make sure that it's working for consumers. And clearly it hasn't been, but we've got to make sure that we turn that around.
No, and is it a fair system where people pay such vastly different bills just depending on where they live in the country? There are big question marks about how this works. And Southern Water, for example, their bills are going up by 53%. Should it be nationalised to make sure that people are paying a fair amount of money and that money is definitely going into improving the system?
Well, listen, I won't preempt the review, which will look in the round about how we get the system to work for people. But what I would say about nationalisation is, you know, it will cost us billions and billions, upward of £100 billion. It will take years in order to unpick some of the really complex ownership structures that have been built up over time. And in the end, the thing that people really care about is the fact that we are getting a grip of the sector, that it is investing in our crumbling infrastructure, that we're cleaning up our waterways and making sure that the system is fair. And so we are prioritising getting that done as quickly as possible, because in the end, that is what matters for consumers. That is what matters for their bills.
Well, let's give you a chance to talk about what you want to talk about this morning. Basically, fundamentally, you want to give consumers, energy consumers, a lot more say, a lot more control over the suppliers.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, what's the reality in energy? You know, it's clear that the market isn't working for people. And whether that is sky-high energy bills, whether that is the collapse of energy companies that we saw recently, or the fact that we have one too many examples of poor customer service. And, you know, there's been a big dent in trust for consumers, and we've got to restore that trust. And so a key part for that, again, is the regulator Ofgem. And we want to look at the Ofgem again to make sure it's got the mandate, the remit, and critically the powers to stand up for consumers, to be that champion that we need in the system, to make sure that the energy market is working the way that it should do, and to make sure that people are getting a fair deal. So that alongside a whole set of things that we're doing to drive down bills, our drive to get to clean power by 2030, upgrade homes so that they're warmer and cheaper to run, we can give people confidence that the system is working in their interest.
OK, talking about a dent in trust, there are obviously still accusations of betrayal from the WASPy women. They feel that the government has gone back on their pledges that were made to them. Do you think it is a fair system that these women aren't going to be compensated?
Well, listen, I recognise that people are going to be really angry and really upset by the decision that's made. And what I would say is the Chancellor, the Prime Minister have an impossible job. There are huge demands for funding because we've had 15 years of huge underinvestment in every realm of our public services, whether that's the NHS, whether that's education. And they've got to take a balanced view about where they put every pound of public money. And in the end, they've made the view that it's not in this, but it is in other things, like, for example, the state pension, which we are increasing £30 billion to make sure that we can increase it by £470 this year. And over the course of the Parliament, make sure that pensioners are £1,900 better off. That was a tough decision that's been made. That was a choice that's been made. And the government is trying to prioritise the things that in the round we think will deliver the change that people voted for when they went to the ballot box.
Well, yes, you see, you talk about what people voted for, but 3.5 million pensioners, women in this country, believed the absolutely unambiguous assurances they were given by leading members of your party before the election that they would be helped, that they would get compensation for the pension that they'd missed out on. And the exact opposite's happened. I mean, I'm sorry, but you must be burning up with shame at this complete U-turn on what you promised, what you swore you would deliver to these women, and what you ended up not doing.
Well, listen, it wasn't in our manifesto, but that's not going to make a difference for people who wanted to. That's not going to make a difference for people who wanted to see this. And look, in the end, what I would say is governing is hard. There are 101 things I would love to do today. And in the end, we've got to take a balanced view about what we do when in order to deliver the big change that we want against the context of an absolutely horrendous inheritance and a really tough financial backdrop. And yes, people will be angry. Yes, of course, people will be disappointed, and we recognise that.
Well, your own party members are angry and disappointed. We saw Diane Abbott yesterday in the House of Commons taking the government to task, taking Keir Starmer to task. Are you worried about a backbench rebellion on this?
Look, colleagues will be disappointed, of course they will. And there will be many of us and many colleagues that want to do things that we as a government cannot do straight away. And what I would say is that the thing that the top team are trying to do is look at all the things that we can do in the round. They made a judgment that the best way to help pensioners was to keep the triple lock and uprate the state pension, £470, £1,900 better off over the course of this Parliament. And people should judge us at the end of this term in terms of the change that we know we have an obligation and a commitment to deliver, and we are absolutely focused on that.
OK.
But it is tough choices that the government is having to make in order to deliver on that bigger win.
I'm afraid we're out of time, and I know you have other interviews to do. Thank you very much indeed for your time,
Energy
Minister. Thank you.